They called him Limping Jack, a busted-up cowboy with a twisted leg and a stare like a loaded gun. Folks in Dead Mule laughed when he hobbled into town, slow, silent, dragging his bad foot through the dust. 2 weeks later, those same men stood frozen, watching him face down the deadliest outlaw gang in the territory. The Black Vultures had burned whole towns and buried sheriffs where the buzzards could find him. But they'd never met Jack. And in the Wild West, you don't laugh at a man who's already been to hell and come back smoking. When the sun rose over Dead Mule that day, folks learned something they'd never forget. Legends don't always ride tall in the saddle. Sometimes they limp. Jack Colton wasn't always a ghost in the corner. Years ago, he was the kind of man folks sent for when things went bad. Texas Ranger badge on his chest, horse that answered to a whisper, and a draw so fast you'd miss it if you blinked. His reputation stretched from El Paso to Abilene. Outlaws feared him. Sheriffs respected him. Women remembered his name. But then came the Palo Duro job, a hunting party turned massacre. They were tracking a Comanche raiding band through the Red Canyon when it all went sideways. 20 men went in. Only one crawled out. Jack. He never talked about what happened down there, only that he woke up with a broken leg and a vulture circling overhead. His comrades were gone, some dead, some worse. His rifle was snapped in two. His horse, torn apart by arrows. And his leg, well, it never healed right. He walked with a stiff drag now. Bone set wrong. Knee barely held together with luck and leather. By the time he reached civilization, he was just another limping has-been. The Rangers cut him loose. Said they were restructuring. That was a polite way of saying, you're done. Jack wandered for years. A dozen towns. 100 nights under stars he stopped naming. Always moving. Always quiet. Always with a battered revolver he never touched unless he had to. Then one dusty evening, he came to Dead Mule. The town wasn't much. One crooked sign, one dusty street. A row of clapboard buildings listing in the wind. A general store with a cracked window. A saloon with batwing doors that creaked like a dying horse. There was a blacksmith who drank too much, a preacher who preached too little, and a sheriff who spent more time napping than patrolling. Perfect place for a man who didn't want to be seen. Jack rented a small room above the saloon. Paid weekly. Cash only. No questions asked. Most days, he worked behind the stable or in the back room, fixing leather gear for ranch hands who didn't care who he used to be. He cleaned saddles, mended straps, patched boots. His limp made things slow, but his hands were steady, sharp, precise. Nights, he sat in the far corner of the saloon, same seat, same drink, a watered-down whiskey he never finished. He watched, always watched. The town gave him a name, Limping Jack. Sometimes Old Jack. Or just that broken fellow with the stare. The laughter wasn't cruel, not always. More like the kind small men use to forget how weak they are. No one expected much from him. Certainly not a fight. If he had a past, they weren't interested. Except Annie. She was 23, maybe 24, with fire behind her eyes and grit in her step. Worked the floor of the saloon like a warrior in a war zone. She carried mugs in one hand, dodged groping fingers with the other, and slapped more than a few drunks back into their stools. Annie noticed things. She noticed how Jack flinched at sharp noises, how his fingers hovered near his belt whenever a voice got too loud, how he always sat with his back to the wall, eyes on the door. She started bringing him fresh bread with his drink, started asking questions no one else dared. "You used to ride, didn't you?" she asked one night. Jack didn't answer. She smiled anyway. "Yeah, you got that look." He looked up at her for the first time then. Just a moment. But Annie saw something in those eyes. Not pity. Not pain. Steel. "You don't scare easy, do you?" she asked, pouring him another. Jack didn't reply, but the corner of his mouth twitched, just barely. That was enough for her. Annie didn't laugh when the others did, didn't whisper behind his back. And when a drunk tried to pick a fight with Jack one night, She was the one who stepped between them and said, "You picking on the wrong ghost, mister." For the first time in a long time, Jack let himself believe something. Maybe this place could be enough. A quiet town, a girl with a sharp tongue, a few coins a day, and silence, blessed silence. But peace never lasts long out here. Not when buzzards start circling. And that silence, it was about to break. They came in at dusk. 5 riders, black dusters, long shadows. They didn't gallop in like some dime novel posse. No, these men rode slow, deliberate, like wolves walking into a sheep pen. Their horses were lean, hungry-looking beasts with blood in their eyes. Their saddlebags bulged with more than just supplies. At the lead rode Silas Rawlins, but folks didn't call him that anymore. They called him Red Eye. Word was, he'd taken a shotgun blast years back, lost the eye, kept the name. What stared out from his left socket now was a glinting red glass prosthetic, always gleaming like a sunset about to die. The other eye, cold and yellow, like a rattler's. Red Eye didn't speak much. Didn't have to. He'd shoot you faster than he'd blink, and he didn't blink often. Every man in his gang wore a black vulture feather somewhere, tied to a hatband, stuck behind an ear, braided into the hair. They called themselves the Black Vultures, and their name had a way of clearing out rooms faster than gunfire. They'd been spotted a few towns over, burned a freight wagon to the ground outside Bitter Creek. Rumor was, they slit the driver's throat just to watch him kick. Dead Mule didn't have a militia. It didn't even have a decent fence. When the vultures rode in, no one fired a shot. Doors slammed. Windows went dark. Mothers pulled their children inside and prayed the gang would pass on through. They didn't. Red Eye dismounted in front of a general store and pushed the door open with the barrel of his revolver. "Evening," he said. The storekeeper nodded fast, hands trembling. "Help you fellas with something." Red Eye smiled with that one working eye. "Just passing through. Thought we'd collect the toll." "Teetoll. For protection," one of the vultures said, grinning like a drunk weasel. "In case any bad men come riding through." They left with whiskey, tobacco, and all the silver from the till. Next morning, the store was in ashes. A week later, the blacksmith refused to pay. His barn burned that night, horses screaming inside. He tried to fight back with an old musket. They broke his arm and carved a vulture into his workbench. The sheriff? He hid in his office for 2 more days before sneaking out the back and riding off. Never came back. By then, the saloon belonged to the gang. They drank for free, took whatever woman they pleased, broke glasses, beat men, and laughed while they did it. Jack watched it all from his corner. He didn't speak, didn't move, just sat there, same drink, same stare. One night, Red Eye finally noticed. "Who's the gimp?" he said, nodding toward Jack. "Some saddle monkey," said one of the gang. "Don't talk much." Red Eye stood and swaggered over. He planted his boots across from Jack and looked him up and down. "Dead Mule's full of surprises," he said. "Didn't expect to find a half-cowboy sitting pretty in here." The others gathered round, grinning. "Maybe we ought to put him out of his misery," one muttered. Jack didn't flinch, didn't even blink. He reached for his glass, took a slow sip, then spoke. "Y'all sure make a lot of noise for scavengers." The grin dropped from Red Eye's face. Silence stretched. A barmaid dropped a glass. It shattered on the floor. Red Eye leaned in close, so close Jack could smell the whiskey on his breath. "Careful, Crippled. I might forget you're already halfway to the grave." Jack turned and met his stare. Calm, clear, flat as a desert lake. Wouldn't be the first man to try. For a second, just 1 second, something passed between them. Not words, not threats. Something colder. Red Eye stepped back with a scoff. "You got grit. I'll give you that." He turned to his men. "But grit don't stop bullets." They laughed as they left, but it sounded a little thinner than usual. From that night on, everything changed. The next morning, Jack found his saddle sliced clean down the middle. The leather hung in shreds, like dead skin off a sunburnt steer. His boots, worn but well kept, had been slashed across the soles, right where no man would see till he took a step and felt the grit bite his feet. And pinned to his door frame, a single black vulture feather, stuck there with a bone-handled knife. He pulled it free without a word, didn't curse, didn't storm down the stairs and shout into the saloon like some angry fool. Instead, Jack went to the blacksmith, who now limped himself from a fractured shin, and bought a new pair of boots. Paid double, said nothing. Then he headed out past the edge of town, down into the canyons, and didn't come back until the sun had melted over the horizon. This went on for days. Jack, quiet as a whisper, disappearing into the gullies and dry washes where no one dared follow. Some figured he was sulking. Others thought maybe he'd snapped and was looking for a grave to crawl into. Annie, though, kept her eyes on the horizon each night until he returned. "You building something out there?" she asked one evening, sliding a plate of stew in front of him. Jack didn't look up. "Might be." "You planning something?" A pause. "I was always planning something." She nodded once, then left him to it. But rumors stirred. Some folks claimed he was setting traps. Others swore they saw glints of metal and light signals coming off the cliffs at dusk. A boy swore he heard gunfire echoing through the gulch, but no one else had. Meanwhile, the black vultures weren't idle. They took over the town square, forcing shopkeepers to hang their black feather symbol in windows. They turned the preacher's chapel into a gambling den, threw dice across the pulpit, while smoking cigars rolled in Bible pages. When a young boy named Micah was caught stealing a loaf of bread for his sick sister, one of the vultures dragged him into the dirt and pistol-whipped him in front of everyone. The crowd did nothing but look away. That night, Annie found Jack cleaning his revolver. "You saw what they did." He nodded. "Gonna stop it?" He didn't answer, but she saw his jaw clench. That was answer enough. The next day, the sheriff's old office was found open, not ransacked, just empty. The badge was gone from the hook, the cot stripped clean. Tracks led out the back. He'd ridden out in the night, left the town to the wolves. That same day, 2 townsmen, brothers named Clem and Roy, tried to stand up. They armed themselves with hunting rifles and marched into the saloon, demanding the vultures leave. They made it 6 steps inside. Clem caught a bullet in the thigh. Roy took 2 in the gut. The vultures laughed as they bled in the dust. Jack helped carry their bodies to Doc Emery's porch, never said a word. That night, the townsfolk started whispering again. "Why is he still here? He's going to get us all killed. He's bringing this down on us." But Jack didn't leave. He spent longer in the canyon now. Came back with dust in his beard and blisters on his hands. Annie noticed new cuts along his forearms, a burn mark across his palm, the look in his eye, harder, sharper, like a man drawing a line in the dirt. Then one night it happened. Annie slapped Red-Eye across the face. He'd reached for her as she poured his drink, too bold, too rough, and she responded with an open-handed crack that echoed like a rifle shot. The saloon froze. Red-Eye's eyes narrowed. His hand went to her throat. "Shoot V done that, girl." She struggled, gasping, face turning red. And that's when Jack stood. The chair scraped back slow, deliberate. Boots hit the floorboards. The sound stopped everything. Red-Eye turned, still clutching Annie. Jack was halfway across the saloon already, his limp somehow steady as stone. "Let her go," he said. Low, dead calm. Red-Eye grinned. "You gonna make me, old man? I'll give you one chance." There was something in Jack's eyes then, something that stopped 2 of the vultures from reaching for their guns. Red-Eye wasn't one to be cowed. He shoved Annie aside and drew. He was fast, but Jack was faster. A single shot cracked through the room. Red-Eye's pistol flew from his hand, clattering to the floor. Smoke curled from Jack's revolver. His arm never shook. He holstered the weapon and stepped over the gun at his feet. "You boys got 2 days to leave town," he said, voice like gravel. or we finish this." And with that, he turned and limped away. No one laughed. Not anymore. They didn't leave. Not after 2 days. Not even after 3. The black vulture stayed put, drinking, laughing, spitting in the dirt like Jack's warning had been nothing but wind. But something had shifted. They weren't as loud, didn't swagger quite so wide. They watched Jack now, watched him come and go, limping through town like a storm cloud with a 6-shooter. They didn't mess with his boots again, didn't touch his room, but they didn't back off either. Instead, they started preparing, posting lookouts on rooftops, riding the outskirts in pairs, stacking crates by the saloon windows, cover maybe, or barricades. It was clear now. Red Eye wasn't just going to let it go. He wasn't the kind of man who walked away from an insult, especially not when it cost him his pride and his trigger hand. The gunshot had shattered a bone at his palm. Doc Emery said he'd never grip the same again. And Red Eye, he'd rather be buried than be seen as weak. Meanwhile, Jack was in the canyon again, sunrise to dusk, sometimes alone, sometimes with Eli. Eli was the youngest of the gang, no more than 19, skinny as a fence rail, always nervous, always looking over his shoulder. One night, Jack heard soft footsteps in the brush and turned, rifle half raised. "Easy," Eli said, "hands up. You lost." Jack asked. I came to talk." Jack didn't lower the gun. Eli swallowed. "Why'd you warn us? In the saloon. Why give us a chance to leave?" Jack stared at him for a long time, because even scavengers deserve a way out. Eli looked down. "Red Eye ain't gonna take it. You know that, right?" "Yeah. He shot his own brother last winter. In the back. Just for saying maybe we ought to head north. Said it was mutiny." "You think he's gonna back down after what you did?" "No," Jack said. "I don't." There was silence then, just the desert wind moaning through the rocks. Eli shifted his weight. "You building traps?" Jack gave a slow nod. "You gonna kill us?" "Just him," Jack said. Eli didn't run, didn't beg. He just stood there, staring at the man the town had once called a cripple. Then he nodded and left. Back in Dead Mule, things were changing. The town folk who once snickered behind Jack's back were suddenly paying attention. The blacksmith, still limping from the vulture's beating, offered Jack a dozen old bear traps and 2 crates of nails. The schoolteacher, Miss Lowell, brought over lantern oil and her father's rusted rifle. And Annie, she took to loading bullets behind the bar, one eye on the door. Jack didn't ask for help, but they gave it anyway, because somewhere deep down, every soul in Dead Mule knew it. No one else was coming. No lawmen. No cavalry. If this town was going to be saved, it'd be by the man they once mocked, the man they called Limping Jack. He showed them how to block windows with sandbags, how to fire, reload, fire again, how to hold their breath and squeeze, not yank, the trigger. He walked the rooftops, marking escape routes with lanterns and chalk. He taught the preacher to lay tripwires. He taught the mayor's wife to aim for the chest. When a few townsmen hesitated, still fearful, still waiting for someone else to take the lead, Jack spoke. "I've seen men die with a gun still in their holster. I don't aim to join him." And that was that. They built barricades in the church, tied ropes across alleyways, lined the rooftops with buckets of rocks and pitch. Every man, woman, and child in town knew what was coming, knew the vultures weren't bluffing. And Jack limped through it all like a general surveying his troops, quiet, focused, relentless. He sharpened his knife, cleaned his rifle, checked the pit traps by moonlight. And on the morning of the 3rd day, the morning after the deadline he'd given Red Eye, the town awoke to silence. No birds, no wind, just stillness. Jack stood in the center of the street, eyes scanning the horizon. Behind him, Dead Mule was ready, every rifle loaded, every heart pounding. The trap was set. All that remained was the first rider. The sun crested over the hills like a brand-new coin, bright, golden, and utterly indifferent to the blood that was about to be spilled. Dust rose in the distance. 5 riders. Same black dusters. Same grim shadows. But they weren't laughing now. The black vultures rode in slow. No need to rush. This was a message, not a raid. A lesson written in lead. Jack stood waiting in the middle of the street, hand resting near his hip. His revolver hung loose in its holster. One boot scuffed the dirt. The limp was still there. Still real. But something in his posture made even the boldest vulture hesitate. Red-Eye dismounted first. His left hand was still bandaged, fingers twisted like roots. He could shoot with his right, sure, but not like before. And that glass eye. It gleamed like a blood moon in the rising light. He walked toward Jack, boots crunching in the silence. "Should have left town, Cripple," he growled. "Would have saved me the effort." Jack didn't move. "You sure you want this?" Red-Eye said. "You're outnumbered, outgunned. You got 1 shot, and you already used it." Jack's voice came low. "Steady. Didn't use it. Gave it." Red-Eye frowned. What the hell does that mean? But before he could press, the sound of shifting gravel rang out behind him. One of the vultures turned. Eli, the youngest, rifle in hand, and it was pointed not at the town, but at Red-Eye's back. "What's this?" Red-Eye barked. "You gone soft, boy." Eli didn't answer. He stepped forward, eyes shaking, hands firm. "I'm done," he said. "Done watching you hurt people just 'cause you can. You aim to stop me. I aim to help him." The air turned razor sharp. Red-Eye took 1 step toward him, and then it happened. From the rooftops came the glint of a mirror signal. Sunlight flashed, bounced, and disappeared. The trap had sprung. Barrels of pitch were kicked from rooftops, crashing beside the horses. Flames erupted in a wall behind the vultures. The beast screamed, reared, bolted. 1 rider was thrown and hit the dirt hard, groaning. The other reached for his gun, but the blacksmith, perched high behind a wagon, fired once and dropped him. Another pit trap snapped shut beneath a fleeing rider, crushing his leg with the sickening crack. Just like that, 3 vultures were out of the fight. Only Red-Eye and Eli remained. And Eli, he lowered his rifle. "I ain't gonna kill you," he told Red-Eye, "but I ain't following you anymore." Red-Eye stared at him, jaw tight, breath heaving. Then he turned back to Jack. "You planned this," he spat. "All of it." Jack didn't flinch. "You made it easy." Red-Eye sneered. "You think these cowards will follow you after today? You think you're some kind of savior now?" Jack stepped forward, limp steady, eyes locked. "I don't need followers," he said. "Just don't want graves full of good folk, 'cause no one stood up." Red-Eye's hand twitched near his belt. Jack's didn't move. "You ain't faster than me," Red-Eye said. "Not with that leg." "No," Jack agreed, "but I don't need to be." It clicked then. Red-Eye looked down and saw the thin tripwire running between them. Too late. With a flick of Jack's foot, he triggered the trap. A makeshift snare yanked Red-Eye off his feet, tangling him in a heap of rope and dust. He hit the ground hard, gun skidding across the dirt. Jack stepped forward, eyes locked on him. Red-Eye struggled, cursing, reaching. And then Jack's boot landed on his wrist. "I warned you," Jack said. 1 shot. Point blank. Not to the head. Not to the heart. To the shoulder, crippling. Ending it. Red-Eye screamed. And the town exhaled. Eli dropped his rifle and sat down in the dirt, shaking. The townsfolk came out slowly, careful, eyes scanning the smoke and wreckage. But there were no more bullets, no more threats, just the silence of justice. And in the middle of it all stood Jack, smoke curling from his revolver, shadows receding, and the legend beginning. The flames behind the vultures had burned down to thick smoke and glowing embers. 3 of the gang lay groaning in the dirt, broken, bleeding, disarmed. One had crawled to the trough and was gulping water with a busted jaw. Another begged the preacher for mercy through bloodied teeth. Red-Eye was still on his back, tangled in the snare, his shoulders slick with blood. The ropes had dug into his limbs, dirt clinging to his coat, like the shame that now coated his name. But it wasn't over, because Red-Eye didn't know how to die quiet. He rolled to his knees, biting back pain, and spat into the dust. "This ain't done." Jack stood across from him, unmoving. "Town's still standing," he said. "You're not." Red-Eye growled, fumbling for the spare pistol strapped to his ankle. Jack didn't draw, didn't blink, just stared. The second Red-Eye lifted the pistol, a shot rang out, not from Jack, from the church bell tower. Annie. She'd taken position up there, with a borrowed rifle. Her hands had trembled loading it, but her aim was true. The bullet punched into Red-Eye's thigh, dropping him with a howl. He writhed in the street, screaming curses that turned to sobs as blood soaked his leg. Jack walked toward him, each step slow, measured. The limp never looked more deliberate. He stood over the fallen outlaw and stared down like a judge at sentencing. "You came here thinking this town was weak," Jack said, voice low, "thinking no one would stand in your way." Red-Eye spat again, face twisted with hate. "You're just a cripple." Jack crouched, wincing slightly as his bad leg bent, and leaned in close. "You're damn right I am." Then he stood, turned, and faced the town. It was the first time they'd seen him in full light. The scar that snaked down his jaw, the old ranger badge tucked into his belt, worn and tarnished, but still there. He holstered his revolver, and the town folks slowly emerged from alleys and doorways, their faces marked with shock, awe, and something else. Pride. The blacksmith dropped his hammer and gave a sharp nod. The preacher crossed himself. The schoolteacher wiped her tears and whispered, "He did it." Annie climbed down from the bell tower, rifle slung over her shoulder. She walked right up to Jack, dust in her hair, eyes still wide. "You all right?" she asked, voice soft. Jack looked around at the wounded, the smoke, the townsfolk huddled together, and nodded once. "I am now." The people of Dead Mule gathered in a wide circle around Red-Eye and what was left of his gang. Jack didn't say another word. He didn't need to. The townsfolk disarmed the outlaws, bound their hands, and tossed their weapons into the trough. Eli stood apart, hands raised. "I'm not one of them anymore," he said. Jack looked at him for a long beat, then gave a single nod. The kind of nod that meant, "You'll have to earn your place. But maybe, just maybe, you've got a shot." That night, Dead Mule didn't celebrate. Not with noise, anyway. They swept the streets, tended wounds, buried 2 good men who didn't make it through the fight. But something had changed. Something deep. They weren't just survivors anymore. They were a town. And at the center of it all, leaning on a cane Annie carved from an old fence post, stood the man they once laughed at. No badge. No title. Just Jack. Limping Jack. The sheriff never came back. No one sent word. No one rode after him. Truth be told, no one missed him. Dead Mule didn't need a man who ran when the fire got close. They needed someone who'd stand their ground. They offered Jack the badge. Twice. First from the mayor, who'd spent the standoff hiding behind a whiskey barrel, and then again from the preacher, who swore it was God's will. Jack turned it down both times. "Suits better men," he said, tying his saddle tighter than it needed. But he didn't leave. Instead, he helped rebuild. Hammered boards with a steady hand. Showed young boys how to clean a rifle without blowing off a finger. Showed the girls how to plant their heels and stare down a liar. And he kept the saloon, but it changed too. No more gang claiming the back table. No more barkeep ducking under the bar every time a stranger raised their voice. The piano played again. Laughter came back. Not the mean kind, not the bitter kind. The real kind. The kind that only shows up when people feel safe enough to be silly. Eli stayed too. He worked for the blacksmith now. Never carried a gun again, not after what he'd seen. He still flinched when boots scuffed too loud, but his hands were strong, and his conscience stronger. The vultures? What was left of them stood trial in Fort Parsons. Red-Eye lived, though he walked with a cane and a grudge. But legends fade quick when they're beaten by a man with a limp. Jack never spoke about it afterward. When kids asked him how he got so fast, he'd shrug. When you've been slow your whole life, he'd say, you learn to make that first move count. They still called him Limping Jack. That name never left. But it didn't mean what it used to. Not anymore. Now, it was spoken with a kind of reverence. Like a campfire story. Like a lesson. Because Jack Colton didn't ride into Dead Mule to be a hero. He came to disappear. But when the wolves circled and the vultures landed, he didn't run. He stood. And in doing so, he gave the town something they hadn't had in years. Hope. A man can be broken. A man can be scarred. But as long as he stands tall when it counts, he ain't done yet. And out there, where the dust never settles and the sky stretches forever, legends walk with a limp. Tales from the dusty trail.